I'm Kelsey Litchfield, and this is the Field Advisor Podcast, where I talk with local experts to unpack the latest agronomy information and research, giving you the knowledge to make informed decisions out in the field. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Field Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Illinois Soybean Association. And today I have on the podcast Stephanie Porter, who says she plays an agronomist on TV, although I think she also plays one in real life. So she also plays one, I guess, on the radio or the podcast today. So welcome, Stephanie, to the podcast. She's the outreach agronomist. She's been on the podcast before. That's no surprise. But I contacted her. I said, maybe we should talk about soybean diseases because it seems to be creeping up here. We just got over the hump of July, or July 4th, I should say, and we're not over the hump of July yet. We still got a ways to go. But Stephanie, let's start here. I'm curious, what calls have you been receiving from farmers? You've also been doing some scouting out in fields. What are you seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, it's good to see you, Kelsey. I feel like I haven't seen you in a while. So it's good to have this podcast.
Here I am.
So we have been out and about. Darby Danzel, who's a new member of our team, has been my sidekick, and we have been focusing mainly on our on-farm trials. Those are all over the state, but we have been doing them in order of planting date, which is not normal. Usually, in a normal year, we would have around the same planting dates, but we have a very wide spread, and we are actually, doing our regular scouting regime that we would normally do, but also taking tissue tests. So we are in the field quite a while, and we're seeing a lot of different things. So I would say in the last week to 2 weeks, we've been more so already focused on Central Illinois, and we're dipping down south in the last couple weeks. So that's where I've been mostly, and we'll continue to head south even further because of planting dates, because we've had I would say our planting dates go anywhere from April 15th, maybe earlier, to actually 2 weeks ago. So we still have a couple fields that we're going to take a look at here. So it's been a long season.
These are sulfur trials for anyone that's curious what these trials are.
Yeah, so these are action trials, and we're looking at whether or not, different ATS or AMS, if they so choose, replicated strip trials. And so we are looking at those and doing, obviously, tissue testing, but also working with Dr. Connor Sybil, with him and Dr. Belo's project, where they're trying to see, which is the appropriate leaf to take for tissue testing. So that doubles our amount of sampling. Is what it does, which is great. I'm learning a lot. So we take the top full leaf, and then we're going down one trifoliate as well and taking that leaf separately. And so it takes a lot of fridge space at my house.
I've noticed Connor has talked about on Twitter, X, whatever it's called, he's been seeing some noticeable differences in fields. Have you been seeing that as well when it comes to what has sulfur on it and what doesn't?
We were pretty disappointed for a while. So we're going out mostly, I did some early evaluations, but mostly at R1 is our target. And now obviously a lot of beans are hitting R2 to R3 growth stage, depending on maturity and where they are planted. And I started to see differetions when I dipped down into a very droughty area, which is not droughty anymore, in that Effingham County area or so, and really started to see a difference just in one spot of the field. We have obviously everything GPS, so I can kind of know where the line is. It's not exact, but I know the line between where there's sulfur applied, where there's sulfur not applied. I can also tell you that that area received 3 to 4 inches in several days within a week period, and I was able to go back a week later. And first of all, the beans looked awesome, like totally different than what they had a week before. But the noticeability between the difference in beans or coloring between the sulfur and no sulfuring was not as distinct as it was previously the week before. So,
speaking of weather, let's talk about that. Where you're at, Taylorville, Illinois, so south of Springfield, you texted last night 3.3 inches of rain in an hour.
Yes.
This is going to extend into our disease discussion.
Yeah.
We hop on a call this morning with some of our board members with Illinois Soybean Association. Those in Northern Illinois, East Central Illinois, they said, well, give that rain to us because we need it. So let's start with just in your area, Stephanie. You've had some hot and humid weather. You've had some rain recently. I know you talk a lot about the disease triangle. Talk a little bit about what conditions are conducive to make what diseases show up. So give us an example or a scenario of what you're seeing in the fields when it comes to the disease triangle.
By the amount of deodorant that I've been using, I can confirm we have humidity.
That's a good test.
And I can also confirm that even in those areas that are really, really dry, there's still humidity there. So I think one of the misconceptions is you have to have rain. We have a lot of humidity still, and that's apparent. But now we have even more. There was a mention by one of our board members of fog. That's one of those red flags. That there's going to be disease. Another one is if you start to have that condensation on your windows. So any kind of leaf wetness, that's going to be when you have disease. The other thing that we focus in on the triangle is temperature. So I have, just by looking out, kind of feeling, knowing, there's going to be differences between the north and the south of Illinois. So there is right now. So we have to be careful when we talk about certain diseases, because there's, like tar spot and northern cornleaf blight are popping up in areas, and that tends to be sometimes a little bit of cooler temperatures. They like cooler temperatures compared to a great leaf spot, for example, or others I'm trying to think that blow up, like rust would blow up. Southern cornleaf rust blows up from the south, and it likes obviously a little warmer temperatures. So I like to judge, for example, we were just in a field in Crawford County, and we were looking, and we started to see some frogeye leaf spot lesions show up. And that's a big deal. Most of the time, the first thing you want to make sure you want to look at the variety. Because a lot of the varieties do have differences of susceptibility to frogeye leaf spot. And that's a big one for fungicides in soybeans. And they like to say that they don't see those a lot in the north, but they can.
What does it look like?
So it is a little circle, brown circle, and if you turn the leaf over, you can sometimes see some sporulation, little gray tufts. It can be confused with another disease that we don't see commonly. It's called Pestalozzi, but that one would have little black dots in the center of the lesion. So that's how you try to, and it can also be confused sometimes with speckling and with herbicides. But this is definitely popping up, and in my mind, I've always kind of known that if you start to see frogeye or if you start to see gray leaf spot, they like similar conditions. And so that's when I tried to start looking for gray leaf spot as well. And of course the growth stage of the plant matters too, and we can go into that, but that's what and I'm not saying frogeye leaf spot's going to be all over, but we did see it in Crawford County. The other disease that was popping up about 2 weeks ago, and we tend to get it a lot worse in our fields for some reason, is septoria, leaf blight. that is in usually the lower canopy, and we tend to not worry about it as much, but once it works its way up more than halfway through the canopy, that can start to cause some issues. And I think we probably need to do more research on that disease. But it can, depending on, normally we just try not to worry about it, but it's definitely another factor out there in the fields.
So in this time frame right now, that's something to be looking for out in the field, those diseases, to see if a fungicide decision is needed. I mean, we hear this recently since market prices, commodity prices are lower, of whether to make that fungicide pass or not. And it differs from soybeans to corn, but so just to hear what you're saying, some of these diseases, if you're having in the field, it warrants a fungicide decision, or maybe not, or talk about the growth stages too of when to look for that.
So typically in soybeans, I do not want to forget about white mold, but we're a little bit past the time to spray for white mold. That's normally a R1 type of spray decision, but we're more at that stage where I'm going to check our own farm today. So my brother could possibly spray fungicide on our beans, and that would be an R3. So we're, with all this heat that we've had, and rain, I mean, we're really starting to progress quickly and get tassels out there. And so it's going to be, we need to make the decision quickly, because we don't want to get past the time where, where a decision would be too late to be made, especially on corn. We're really worried about the corn as well, especially after the 3.3 inches of rain. And we're really at that growth stage. And another factor too, to take into consider, especially this year, and I know we are on our farm, is that, and it's not always, but later planted tends to get a little bit more disease, and sometimes insects. So really make sure you're scouting for certain things like that. We're also, I guess I'll throw in, seeing Japanese beetles. I have not seen anything really heavy. We tend to see one or two every time we go into a field, maybe, a cluster. I would say I was in one field that probably was maybe the Crawford County. And we're also seeing a lot of stink bugs in the south too, and I really think they're a factor as well, especially later in the season, especially in the south. So something to watch out for as well. We've also been finding grape collapses, beetles. They're not as a huge foliar feeder normally. I mean, we haven't seen huge amounts of those. But there's more of them this year, and I'm sure there could be, a random field that could have a lot in them if they, had them earlier in the season, feeding on roots.
Talk about throwing that insecticide in with a fungicide. You mentioned that might be an option. Talk to us about making that kind of decision for a farming operation, what they should consider, I guess. And you said a lot of people do that.
So a lot of decisions are being made on the farm. A lot of decisions have already been made. Obviously, fungicides, insecticides are often bought earlier in the winter to get some discounts. There's a lot of farmers that are trying to make that decision. Typically, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, a lot of people in Illinois tend to just throw in that insecticide with the fungicide at the same time, because typically insecticides cost less. There's also decisions being made between generics and non-generics, which is kind of a big deal with fungicides. And then oftentimes, if you want to make a decision for an insecticide, there are some thresholds for some insects, and there aren't some for others. I would say the main one that we're concerned with is at this time would be Japanese beetle. And so mainly you want to watch for foliar feeding at this time with Japanese beetle. Look at the whole plant and make sure that 10 to 15% is not being fed on. The other thing with Japanese beetles is with corn, and mainly we're concerned with those silks. There are a lot of different parts of the state that are droughty. I know it's hard to believe, but still really, really dry. And they're worried about pollination at this time, with silks and maybe tassels not coming out at the same time in sync. We also have to worry about Japanese beetles because in droughty situations, we aren't getting a lot of silks popping out. And if the Japanese beetles are feeding on those, then that's even more, a bigger issue that we could disrupt pollination. So those are a couple of factors. Last thing, I would be remiss if I didn't say this, but Japanese beetles a lot of times are on just edges. Mm-hmm. So I know we don't like to be in the field when it's 100 degrees out, but if you want to take a look at the rest of the field, it may just be a lot of them are on the edges. So don't panic.
I noticed that on a bean field I was walking by this morning. You saw a lot of Japanese beetles on the edge, but then he got a little closer, and that's just where they like to hang out, I guess. Okay, so going back on the disease side, you mentioned some of those diseases: frogeye leaf spot, gray leaf spot, septoria, leaf blight. Those are all interesting names. I think diseases are so interesting. My question, Stephanie, for you now is now going into the next couple of weeks, what to be looking for. So we saw that in the past 2 weeks. I know it can be hard to predict things, but I guess I'm just curious if farmers are out there scouting, what's the time frame for those diseases into July and August that could be a problem area?
Yeah, so normally this is the best time, obviously, to be scouting. This is probably the hottest time that most people are scouting. I would say that, if we're going to look forward, I would again focus on some of the later planted fields as well. Make sure that we're not getting, for example, bean leaf beetles later in the season in soybeans. I also mentioned stink bugs as well. Those are just some things I would watch out for. Tar spot's always a factor, and it can show up later and get you. Especially there's been some work done in Iowa State where sometimes the generic fungicides might not give you as much efficacy, and so you may need to do another application depending on when you applied the first time. Of course. And so let's say, for example, you decided not to spray a fungicide in corn, and all of a sudden our temperatures got cooler, which it can happen, and probably not. A little bit more conducive for tar spot, and then you would want to make sure you kept scouting, and maybe if it started to blow up, you may want to apply another fungicide later in the season, which is very possible. I would have never said that, a couple years ago before we had tar spot, but that's another thing to watch out for.
Okay, I'm going to bring up a disease that I know you've been talking about a lot in previous years, but I do want to touch base on sudden death syndrome and then red crown rot, because I think there's some misconceptions out there about those two diseases, and one can be mistaken for the other. So talk about those two diseases. I think a lot of people are hearing more about red crown rot. It's this disease in Illinois that's been found, I believe, 2018. It's being found in surrounding states, and it's kind of this big scare that people are thinking about. But I really want you to talk about going and scouting for red crown rot, SDS, and then how to follow through with the appropriate diagnosis. Because I think that's what I'm hearing from these agronomists, that you need to make sure you're diagnosing the correct disease, because they do have a lot of symptoms that they share.
Yeah, I think we've just been so stuck in a rut where we just SDS, it's been around since I was little, so that's a really long time. That was the first disease I ever knew. So you can just kind of look out there, you see those symptoms on the leaves, that that interveinal chlorosis, as we call it in the plant pathology world, and you're like, oh, you don't even have to dig it up, you don't have to go out to the field, you just see it from the truck. And now we have other diseases, that are showing up. One more common, red crown rot, that has the exact same foliar symptoms. Yeah, that now some agronomists are saying, yeah, there's some differences here and there. I recognize that, but for someone that had never seen it before, they just assumed it was probably SDS. And in our agronomy world, and when we talk about yields for beans, maybe it was a marketing type thing, but it's true that normally when you start to see some SDS showing up, you kind of get a little excited because it's not that we know it can be bad. The later it shows up, the better, because less yield loss. But if we start to see a little bit of SDS showing up, we know that those conditions for that disease to develop are also very good conditions for us to have high soybean yields. So that's kind of been tuned in my brain, and I know other farmers' brains. So now, if we're starting to see those symptoms, we need to actually go out there and confirm that it's SDS, or make sure that it's not red crown rot. So we need to dig up the plant. We need to look at the base of the plant and see if we see these little red type of tiny little fungal structures, and that could be red crown rot. And a lot of times we've noticed in the last years where we've had periods of drought that we may not even get those fungal structures to develop, and that's when we really aren't sure if we have this disease or not in our field. And so if you're just unsure, I would definitely send it off to a diagnostic lab if possible. Any state has those, and you can send it off to U of I, obviously to the plant clinic if you want, but just to make sure you confirm that you have it. And a lot of times when I'm dealing with farmers that have it, they start going field to field and they'll find it too. When you really start looking, unfortunately, you start finding things.
Mm-hmm. I know you've been to some fields in Western Illinois that have been, red crown rot has been detrimental, and they're turning to corn. So it's an absolute terrible disease that some are having it terribly. But I also think, talk about why it's important to get the diagnostics, like you just said, but that will help make decisions for the future of those fields too, knowing that that's a possible disease that's present, because it carries on, correct?
Correct. I mean, you're not going to get rid of it. It's there. One of the factors that's popped up in making decisions, to your point, is that red crown rot has a lot of alternate hosts. We're still learning those. One being alfalfa. So, for example, my neighbor found red crown rot. They also have a dairy farm. And so that was one of the things that first popped up in my mind, that, they can't grow alfalfa either. So, I mean, it really affects your rotation. The other thing is they might want to try to use some of the seed treatments out there that maybe they weren't normally using. It might be a higher rate depending on the label. So make sure you know that, but it's not going to be a cure-all for sure, but it's one of the tools we have to use against red crown rot at this time. So there's other cultural things. As with all root rots, you may want to improve drainage in the field. That's going to help you a lot. You may want to check out maybe starts cleaning some tools, harvesting that field last. There's just a lot of different decisions if you don't want to spread it to other fields.
Because there's a lot of unknowns still about red crown rot. And I know Dr. Boris Camilletti, University of Illinois plant pathologists, private companies are doing research to truly figure out how it's spread, and learn more about this disease. And I know in the past, Illinois Soybean Association has said if you suspect you have red crown rot, send that in so that they can do more research on it. I know you used to work at the plant clinic. You have that background. Just talk about the importance of doing more research to get more, hopefully, answers about how to control the disease.
Yeah, so for a lot of these diseases, they have maps. where they start turning the county red so you can actually see the spread. And that is probably the biggest question I get from farmers is where is it? And if you don't actually send it into one of your state's plant clinics and get it confirmed, that's about the main way that you can get that map. Obviously, county to turn red so you know where this disease is located and they can do more work on it. And I think that's what's really happened in the last 2 years is we've read, we knew it was obviously here, but just we didn't know to what extent it was across the state and obviously now many other states around us.
And if they just Google, like I just did right now, Illinois red crown rot map, and if you click on images, it shows a blog on Field Advisor that I believe we posted back in, wow, that was 2022. That's not the one I wanted to bring up. That's a little, okay. There's several articles being done about it, but I know, Stephanie, you posted something this past fall, a blog called Red Crown Rot, Where Is It and What's Being Done About It? And there is a map there. So I wanted to share with people where they could potentially find that map. So if you just Google it, go to Field Advisor, search Red Crown Rot on our website, you'll be able to find it. Anything else you want to share, Stephanie, on that topic?
And I want to give credit to the Crop Protection Network. They have a lot of these maps, a lot of these tools that you can use. A lot of them are in the news right now, but for example, if there's certain mode of actions you would want to use on certain diseases, you would go to the fungicide efficacy table. They also have a really cool new tool called Fungicide ROI, which I think is very important in these times, obviously, with low commodity prices. And maybe, if you're trying to decide between a generic or a non-generic fungicide, you would input, the grain prices at the time, your expected yield, and maybe how severe your disease is to actually see if you're going to get a return on investment if you make that purchase of a fungicide.
Stephanie, great tools. There's a lot of tools out there, so definitely take advantage of them. One of my last questions for you is, and this could be broad, just doesn't have to be diseases, but based on what you've seen so far this season, words are just falling out of my mouth. What are any lessons that you've learned that you might want to share with farmers? Because sometimes a lot of this, you just have to, if you just have to prepare for next year, is what I'm saying. And I know, like, I've been to a field with you where it had pretty bad Phytophthora, and you're like, well, that's just good to know for next year, because really there's nothing you can do about it right now.
You took one of my answers, Kelsey.
And maybe I've been spending too much time with you. She's rubbing off on me.
I don't know if that's good or bad. Well, there's so many different things, but I think that was one of the main things that popped in my head was we're seeing some diseases out there where I think that Phytophthora we're seeing in a lot of different fields, and we take it for granted too, but I think we need to start really diving into whether or not some of the varieties that we're buying, if they have the correct score, and if they do think that they have good tolerance, or if they have the right RPS gene for Phytophthora, is that RPS gene working? Do you have the right stack in there? And I think that that's one thing that popped in mind. The fact that I've already seen frogeye makes me think that maybe you should start making sure that you have some resistance against that. We just had the weather for that disease as well. But the other thing is just we continue to have issues with weeds, and something's going to have to give. We're to the point now. I talked to somebody a week ago, and they had the cultivator out, and we preach against tillage, but once you get past obviously that R1 stage where we can't make any more fungicides or herbicide. You had me on fungicides. We can't make any more herbicide applications, or we shouldn't. They're off label. What do we do now? And you see a lot of, people out there with hose and walking beans again. And the weeds are an issue. I think that a lot of the populations were lower. We had later planting. We didn't have row closure by the 4th of July in many fields. that weren't planted early, and we have a weed issue. This is nothing new.
Okay.
Some of we are getting resistance to glufosinate, and different ones are popping up in the state. The first of of all the U.S. and these are commonly used herbicides in the state, and so we're going to have to start thinking about different ways to combat weeds going forward.
Definitely. It's always been a problem, but I think every year we're reminded of that problem over and over again. And I know Dr. Hager at U of I, Dr. Carla Gage at Southern, that working on stuff. But there's so many fields are different, whether you have no-till, conventional till. It's a lot to look into all of those variables, but I think they're making good progress. And I know ISA is funding some of that research, so stay tuned on what that all entails.
One of the coolest things, and I'm going to nerd out here, but Darby also noticed it too, but one of the coolest things about our on-farm trials is I bet every trial is different. It has, we assume we have 15-inch rows. I have to get the tape measure out because visually I'm like, is that 15? That's a 20. That's a 20-inch row. Mm-hmm. We have 30-inch rows all over the place, and we also have all different types of tillage. And even after, we even have a field that had pumpkins in it at one point. And so we're learning a lot, and we have a lot of diverse, obviously I like to say every farm's different, but we really have a diverse amount of plots all over the state, and a lot of people are farming differently. So we're seeing what things that work and what don't work. A lot of people assume that I have the management, but I'm going in blind, so I don't know what varieties are out there, so I'm not jaded by that or by what company or anything like that. But we're learning a lot about different, obviously, systems that are going on out in the field and seeing what's working, what's not working. Mm-hmm.
So I will say stay tuned, because if you think we'll just drop off the face of the planet, not talking about trials again, we will follow up. I know Stephanie and Darby have been out in the fields. Once the team gets that data collected together, we'll have some information hopefully to share at next year's Field Advisor Forum, blogs on Field Advisor. So we will be sharing what comes out of those trials. But I think that's a good way to end this, is to say, every field is different. And I think I sound like a broken record, but every person I talk to that says you need to get out there and scout. And I'm sure you would echo that same thing, Stephanie.
Yeah, every year, obviously, Mother Nature throws us a lot of different things. And I think when we start getting a lot of different planting dates out there too, we start to, that really kind of makes us see different things than we normally would. And so that makes us, I would be much more diligent, especially on some of the later stuff as well.
Yeah. Stephanie, anything else we didn't mention that you wanted to add?
Not that I can think of. I think you pretty much covered everything.
I'm sure there's something I didn't cover.
You pretty much got it. I know
sometimes after the episode, I think, dang, we didn't cover that, but I know you can't cover everything. So
there are some odder things that are popping up here and there in some parts of the states, but we're still learning about those in beans, and I think it's just a matter of, again, the weather that it's maybe something we might not see again. So
yeah. Well, I will put in a plug for the Illinois Soybean Association. They have their own internal agronomy team, which Stephanie's a part of. I'd be remiss to say I'm a part of. But I would say enjoy, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. You hear about these different situations. You get farmer calls to go out and look. So that is a service that the team provides.
Yes.
To provide some independent third-party information on some of those fields. So It's a good way to wrap it up. All right. Thanks, Stephanie. We'll keep tabs on the rest of the summer. If you see anything interesting, let me know.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Kelsey.
Thanks for listening to the Field Advisor Podcast. Unbiased, independent agronomy information to keep your farm moving forward. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, your voice from the field. This podcast is funded by the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff Program. Stay connected with Field Advisor on social media. Follow, like, and share to keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the Field Advisor podcast on your favorite podcast platform.